Hi, good afternoon. My name is Stacy Blakeley, and I am honored to be the CEO of the Policy Circle. If you aren't familiar with the Policy Circle, we are a national, nonpartisan organization that informs, equips, and connects women to be more impactful citizens. Central to everything that we do at the Policy Circle are our fact fueled, nonpartisan, and excellently crafted briefs. Policy Circle briefs cover a wide range of topics, everything from mental health to the Middle East. And today we're going to be digging into a newly published and updated brief focused on immigration. So, with every Policy Circle brief, there is a typical format so that you can get the historical context, understand the constitutional framing of an issue. What's the current landscape? What are the facts and the data points that you need to know to really understand an issue? And importantly, we highlight solutions that are rooted in entrepreneurial values, innovation, personal agency, and that local nexus of control. Each brief includes a discussion guide, and so that you can dig in and host amongst your peers, your family, your friends, your neighbors, constructive conversations that are focused on fact and solutions and not on politics and narrative. So, one of the topics that many in our community are discussing right now is immigration, and we are not alone. This in recent poll, the Harvard Caps Harris poll just said that this is the number one issue of 68% of Americans right now. And there is some consensus and bipartisan concern on this issue because it is complex, it is multifaceted, and it touches on so many aspects of our lives, from the economy, the impact on providing social services. National security is at the top of many people's list, crime, and really what's the overall impact on the future of our country if we don't get this crisis under control. The states in particular have been left to bear the brunt of these challenges. And so I'm looking forward to our conversation today to really dig in and understand what is the impact at the state level and what are the next steps, not only for legislators, policymakers, but for us as citizens. So I am delighted today to welcome our first speaker and expert. Daniel D. Martino is a PhD at economics at Columbia University. We've already discussed we should probably have a whole other conversation about his experience at Columbia, given the circumstances these days. But he is a graduate fellow at the Manhattan Institute, an excellent partner of the Policy Circle, where he focuses on high-skill immigration policy. Daniel was raised in Venezuela, and he advocates against socialism and sharing his firsthand experiences through media appearances and founding the Dissident Project. So we are so excited to hear more from you, Daniel, and to dig into what we know is a complicated issue. So welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Stacy.
So let's start right now with the landscape. I know that we are seeing daily reports in the media. Of course, we've all seen viral videos that give us a great deal of concern. But let's dig into the facts. Can you give us a sense of how the current immigration patterns are in comparison, perhaps, to historical patterns? And what do you find most concerning about your observations there?
Yeah. So that people get an idea, because there's always a lot of numbers thrown around over, 10 million people have crossed under Biden's presidency, all of this. There is a difference between a crossing and an actual person coming into the United States. A lot of people were immediately turned away during Title 42 during the pandemic, but they counted as like a crossing even though they didn't get in. So the net number of people that are being allowed into the United States through the southern border by Border Patrol agents, by the administration, is about 2 million people a year, each year.
Okay.
That is much higher than it used to be, say, 10 years ago. In the 2010s, we had, in the decade from 2010 to 2020, we had the least illegal immigration really we've had since maybe the 60s, the 1960s. We were really under an extraordinarily period of border security, even though we were still very concerned about it, where each year only approximately 300, 400,000 people actually made it into the United States, which is still a lot of people, I understand, but it's much less than 2 million. And it used to be that in the 80s, we used to have also 2 million a year coming regularly to the United States. In the 90s, it was also a huge problem. And a big reason that declined starting in the 90s was, yes, an increase in border security from the 1980s reforms and the 1990s reforms that built walls, that hired much more border patrol. We went from about 5,000 border patrol agents in the 80s to 20,000 in the 2000s.
Mm.
So, times four the number of agents for the same length of border. Um, and the other part was Mexico. Mexico simply became a richer country, and as such, many fewer Mexicans try to come illegally to the United States. Today, actually, the big illegal immigration problem we have is not Mexican exclusively anymore. It used to be in the 90s and the 80s that 90% of the people crossing the border were Mexicans. And now it's really less than 50%, much less. It's people from all over the world, not just Central America either. And that actually makes solving this crisis much more difficult because it's easy to deport somebody who comes from Mexico because we can legally just take them back to their country across the border.
Hmm.
But you cannot deport somebody from another country back to Mexico. You need to get permission from their home country government in order to land a deportation plane, which is even more expensive when it's not in Mexico. So, the landscape is very different from what it used to be.
And if you look at the fact that you have Chinese nationals, folks from the Middle East and Africa, now part of that population, that is sparking more of these concerns, not only just about the process, but motivation and what they're trying to accomplish by crossing the border. So there's a lot of people pointing fingers about why this is happening. We're in an election year, of course. So this is the number one issue. And some claim this is an intentional loosening, or others will point to raging incompetence. What is the reason? And give us an understanding, like what could be a motivating factor for having not only the number of crossings that we have, at least those are being counted, but for the massive amount that are not even accounted for. What could possibly be driving this particular situation?
So I think initially what happened, say let's go back to 2019, 2018. 2018, the border was heavily secured. In 2019, we had an immigration crisis that maybe people have forgotten about, where we had a huge spike in border crossings that then was then controlled because we got Mexico's cooperation to keep people in Mexico. Then that broke down, that agreement, but then the pandemic came and that obviously plunged illegal immigration to record lows just because people didn't want to
Sure.
come,
Sure.
didn't want to leave and cross borders. As the pandemic subsided, obviously illegal immigration rebounded, and that was happening at the end of the Trump administration too in the last few months. But then when Biden came in, I think the big issue that ignited this was really not even policy, but perception. People forget perception matters for this, and he created the perception that it would be permissible to come to the United States, and criminal organizations take advantage of it. What my experience is that illegal immigrants themselves are heavily misinformed, and they simply believe lies, and they try their luck because they think they will be accepted, and the reality is that they were.
Yeah.
And let me tell you, historically, people who showed up at the border were actually let in, even during the Trump administration. The difference was that fewer people even showed up.
Mm.
And the perception change during Biden made a lot more people come. As more people came and succeeded coming to the United States, they tell their friends, they tell their families, and even more people try, and from new countries. And that's exactly what's happening. And then you add to that we had, for the first time in US history, states and cities like New York City, even places in Massachusetts, in Illinois, that started giving free housing to anybody who showed up. That never happened before. The US has a long history of illegal immigration. But, I ask people all the time, had you ever seen a homeless illegal immigrant before in your life, before 2020? Never. They were always working and doing their own thing because they came here to work and make money and send money back to their families. That's why we have illegal immigration. Never we had people living in government facilities coming from the southern border. This is a new phenomenon, all because of the misguided compassion of these cities that are just actually encouraging illegal immigration with this. I interviewed a woman from El Salvador here in New York City, and I asked her point blank. This will appear in Fox Nation soon. It's a documentary that they're putting out. Would you have come to New York City, or really to the United States? I told her, if they didn't give you free housing. And she said, no, I would have stayed in Mexico working. She was from El Salvador. She went first to Mexico. She stayed there for several months working, and it would have been better for her to stay working in Mexico rather than come to America if she didn't get free housing. Of course, anybody around the world would be better off moving to America if they got free housing, right? It's common sense for them, but for us, it's not common sense to do it.
So the perception became reality and even better than probably what some of these folks expected. And now you have this flood of individuals, and you have certain cities, certain places with taxpayer funded benefits to these folks. Talk to me about the political implications of all of this, because we've seen some wrangling over legislation. It's an election year. This is tricky, right? It's tricky for both sides of the aisle. What do you envision? Because it is like it has been a political football, like administration to administration. Now it is like the focal point, and it's probably a chess piece in the upcoming election. I don't want to get too big in politics, but I think it's important for us to understand the motivations behind perhaps why we haven't seen legislation, why we haven't seen action yet. Is that the October surprise? Like, what does this look like,
Yeah,
Daniel?
that's a good question. So while the political implications are big, just because the practical implications are big, at the local government level. New York City, we're going to have the smallest police force in decades because they had to cut the budget in order to make space for migrants. The 3% of the city's budget is going to paying for housing for the migrants. That's just paying for housing, by the way, but because they're housing them in hotels that otherwise would have tourists paying hotel tax, we're also getting lower revenue that's not accounted for there.
Sure.
So really, it's more than 3% of the budget. And cities cannot run deficits like the federal government. They can't get in debt. Therefore, they need to cut in other areas, or they need to raise taxes, which means we're all paying for this. And they have to cut in schools, they have to cut trash collection, they have to cut public parks, and New Yorkers are not happy with the management of Mayor Adams, and across the country you get incidents of crime by many of these illegal immigrants who were not vetted. Let me give you one example. In Texas, this happened recently where they caught a guy who was on the Interpol watch list. He was Venezuelan, but he had been committing crimes in Colombia for a long time, a kidnapper, extortionist, many things. He crossed the border in January of this year, so less than 4 months ago, and they let him through. He didn't sneak in. He turned himself in, and they let him through
Through the
despite being on the
process.
Interpol watch list. And then they just found out in March that turns out we let through somebody who was a really bad criminal, and they caught him and they arrested him. Why did they let him through? Why
Right.
are
This
we
is
not even doing the minimum vetting? The
such a broken
minimum.
system, Daniel. It's just so upsetting. And
And
I mean,
so
I think
you ask about
politically,
motivation.
yeah, yeah. What's the motivation?
I think the motivation really is that there's a lot of far left nonprofit groups that are profiting from this. When the federal government gives grants to nonprofits that help migrants, they make money from migrants. The hotel industry in New York City is making hundreds of millions of dollars of the contracts with the city. There are sketchy contractors that are building the 10 cities for the migrants too. This is nonprofits that receive donations too, asking because we want to help the poor migrants, and in reality, they're just taking the money. So there's a lot of like that going on with profit. Politically, then you get that immigration has always been a difficult issue. And so congressionally, what are we going to get done? We had a deal, but then it's in the Senate, but then it fell through. We can talk about that if you'd like. But oh, sorry. For the extremes, there's no convenience in solving this issue.
Mm,
Because for the far left, this is great because if Trump comes into office and there's a huge migrant crisis, there will be inhumane things happening, just like they are now. But this time they will be able to blame it on the Republicans. And for the people who are oppose Biden too, the reality is that if the border crisis were to be solved today, really, that would benefit Biden. Let's be
right.
honest. If somebody should have an incentive to solve this crisis, is Biden, which is why I'm puzzled it's not being taken care of, because there are some things that can be done through executive action that
Hmm.
won't solve everything, but that would go a long way.
Yeah, I think that it's going to be interesting to see if timing, right? The most advantageous timing on that. Let me shift gears a little bit before we bring Representative Troxclair on. In Texas, in particular, we've seen a very interesting series of court decisions, the Supreme Court ruling. We still have an appeals process in place because Texas passed a law, because it's Senate Bill 4, and that was really going to enable them to start enforcing laws in Texas that they felt like the federal government perhaps was not enforcing. This is in a state of limbo. I think right now you've got that kind of on ice, if you will, while the appeals court deliberates this. Can you talk to us just before Ellen joins us, this tension between states' rights to protecting its own citizens, looking at the border, for instance, specifically with like states like Arizona and Texas, but then also dangerous precedent, for instance, if we have states start trumping, if you will, federal law on this. Can you just give us a little primer here to understand what's going on?
Yeah, that's my concern. Look, immigration has historically been a federal, concern, and of course, the states can do some things, just like Texas has done in many ways, trying to put barriers and things like that. But as you may know, as before would kind of like take people who are suspected and illegal immigrants and try to deport them. Um, the concern is the state has never done that on the one hand. So how are they going to identify and verify that they're actually illegal immigrants? That's a little bit complicated unless they see them coming through themselves. And even if they do, we don't have, I don't think state police has the authority to even go into Mexico and do it. They would need Mexican authority. Mexico is not cooperating right now. Mexico is actually profiting from this crisis. That's another angle. The Mexican police is extremely corrupt. They're charging migrants per head in order to let them through. I know this from people who have been there firsthand. And so that's my concern. My other concern is that Democrats could use a precedent that if we were to say, Texas wins this case and they can, enforce this before, perhaps a Democratic state could do the opposite. A Democratic state could simply legalize people. There are actually Democratic lawyers who are trying to figure out a way to grant work permits to illegal immigrants in their states as a state capacity when that's not a state authority. So, it's really complex. I would say that the putting up barriers is good. I'm not so sure about using state police to deport people. I think that's maybe crossing the line. A lot of people say, but Democrat states are not cooperating with ICE, right? Not helping us deport the people who we should be deporting. And that's true, but there's a difference between states cooperating and not cooperating and states actively enforcing immigration law, right? I think that the states, what they could do, though, is, there are cases like this terrorist that was caught. They could identify these people and hold them for ICE indefinitely. And they could hold them, and instead of deporting them themselves, just hold
Right.
them so that they don't leave. That's a middle ground that I think it's much more legally sound, and also wouldn't interfere with these precedent issues.
I think that's actually a very interesting way to look at a compromise, if you will, that still gets especially dangerous people back in custody without making that final determination. Okay, Daniel, we could talk all day, and we are going to come back to you in just a few moments. But for now, I'm going to shift gears and welcome longtime friend of the Policy Circle, Texas Representative Ellen Troxclair. She is a leader serving in the Texas House District 19. She's really focused on lowering taxes and limited government, and she is a devoted mom, nonprofit leader, small business owner. She represents Blanco, Burnett, Gillespie, Kendall, and Western Travis counties. Most beautiful part of Texas, in my opinion. And she has really been a huge supporter of getting other women to step up and to lead. So she's obviously one of our favorites around here, but she has been deeply involved in this immigration issue, has visited the border many times and actively engaged. And so I'm looking forward to welcoming Representative Ellen Troxclair. Hi, Ellen.
Hi, how are you, Stacy? Thank you so much for having this important conversation. I think, we're so inundated constantly with border discussions and work here in Texas, but honestly, we need the entire country to be paying attention to it. So I really appreciate you bringing people together to talk about this today.
Well, your insight is so valuable. I know you have made many visits, and for those that don't follow you on social media, I'm going to suggest they do that because you have given some real insights firsthand. And if you wouldn't mind sort of resharing those with our audience, when have you been visiting? What are you seeing right there at the Texas-Mexico border?
Yeah, so I am a member of the Texas Homeland Security Committee. So we are the committee that does focus on border issues and law enforcement issues. And so been down to the border several times in that capacity, including with Governor Abbott as he kind of makes his announcements of the new things that he's rolling out. But what you see, at least on the conservative news channels, with just trash everywhere. I mean, I don't think I've been there a single time where I haven't seen big groups, long lines, people wading into the river. It's a constant flow. And I think that hasn't properly been maybe represented by the news media, because it's not that we're trying to put people back into a inhumane situation. It's that they're being trafficked. There's not a single person who's coming across that border who is coming here on their own free will. I mean, if you don't use a coyote in the cartels, they will hunt you down and make you pay for it. So there are people who are handing over their life savings, being told, what the best routes are, where to hide, being led, by the way, being the women certainly being assaulted on the way. You can see evidence of that as well down there. And then once they get over here, of course, they're sold into modern day slavery by being indentured servitude or sex slavery. So it's really shocking. It's really shocking to see that, especially up until the Governor Abbott actually took the step to secure the park, Shelby Park, one of the main areas where people were coming through. That's the place that I have visited the most. And I mean, people would just walk across, and you'd look for the person, and they know the difference between the state trooper uniforms and the Border Patrol uniforms. And they're just told, look for the Border Patrol uniforms, and they'll bring you right across. So they in the past have not been stopped at all. You can just walk right across the river. The river's very shallow. It's like 3 feet. So at least in that area. So, sometimes you hear the news media making a big deal about, oh, people are drowning, or people, the buoys are causing this or that. That is definitely not happening because of the buoys. It's very shallow there.
I think it might be helpful, especially, when you talk about buoys and things of that nature, for folks that maybe haven't followed this as closely. If you don't mind, share with us what the state of Texas has done. There's some practical and sort of policy-oriented steps to try to address just the first step there, like to have the actual illegal crossings stop.
Right.
Let's not even talk about once they get here. Like, what is the governor and the task force? What have they done, and what else do they want to do to just secure the border?
Right. Well, it's a challenge because Texas has 1,200 miles of border. So it is an incredibly large state. And in the absence of help from the federal government, when it comes to building the wall, I mean, that is an incredible expense for the taxpayers of Texas to burden. And we're doing as much as we can. But this last legislative session, we appropriated about over $6 billion of Texas resident money to continue building the border wall, to increasing the number of boots on the ground, and to funding these orange buoys that I went and saw personally. One statistic that is fascinating to me is that Texas now has built more miles of border wall than the Trump administration did. So we have taken that baton and really run with it. But the reality is, it's financially impossible to complete that wall just on our own. That's where kind of the buoys have come in as an innovative and cost-effective solution. Those are the floating orange things that at first, I had some questions about, which is why I went down there to see them personally. But you can't swim under them. They're anchored to the bottom of the riverbed. You can't get over them. They spin if you try to get over them. And then they have kind of razor in between them, so you can't get between them either. So those and they're about a tenth of the cost of the border wall. So and they can be deployed much, much quicker. We're talking months instead of years. So that was really the silver bullet. And the best part was that because they're in the middle of the river, you are ensuring that the migrants remain in Mexico, and they're being directed, with megaphones to turn around, remain in Mexico, rather than actually getting on U.S. soil. Because even while we are working with private landowners to, have easements and things to build the wall, the reality is, even if you're even if you're still on the Mexico side of the wall, you are technically on U.S. soil once you've crossed the river, and so that's where a lot of the conflict with the policies of the federal government had happened. So if Texas can do everything we can to have them remain in Mexico, and by the way, there are 29 legal ports of entry into Texas, and some of them are just a mile or two down the road of where they're crossing illegally. So it's not even that hard to just go to one of the legal ports of entry, and that's that. What we're trying to say is it's not safe. You're not supposed to be doing this. There's a lot that we're directing them to remain in Mexico and to go to one of the legal ports of entry. So that's what. I should also mention the buses. The busing of illegal immigrants into other states, like New York, has been, I think, surprisingly effective in bringing attention and awareness. And it is mind-boggling to me to see the response of, the mayors of these liberal cities who claim to be sanctuary cities say, oh my gosh, we're overwhelmed, we can't handle it. And it's like, oh my gosh, this is a bus of 50 people. You need to come down to the border for once, because it's not a Texas problem. It is a United States problem. We are doing our best to do everything we can. I know your last question to the previous speaker was about the remain in Mexico policy that we've tried to implement on our own, but we're honestly just desperate because our community, the border towns are being totally overrun. Our law enforcement is stressed, and our taxpayers are being stressed. So we need the rest of the country to step up as well. We need a president who's willing to take it seriously.
Okay, well, let's shift gears on this because you opened this up. Sorry. If you were president, Ellen, which I'm a big fan of. But if we look at this and you think, okay, what is the lowest hanging fruit here? What can we do in a short period of time to stem the crisis? I think it would be a much longer conversation for us to talk about reforming immigration policy, right, which we can all agree it has been something really neglected. Both sides of the aisle have just punted this because it's difficult to find a winning position, if you will.
Right.
If you were president, and Daniel alluded to this, and we can talk about it a little bit more when we're together, but what would be the first step?
Reinstitute the remain in Mexico policy that was in place under President Trump, and that was removed, in Biden's first day in office. That has, according to the law enforcement officials and the Texas Department of Public Safety, that one policy change, and as Daniel had talked about, perception as well. There was this, oh my gosh, the floodgates are open, you can now come. But remain in Mexico was if you came to one of the ports of entry, you got a court date, you got it, or maybe it's not a court date, but a time and place that you're supposed to show up and talk to whoever you need to talk to come through legally. Well, in those intervening months, you had to remain in Mexico. So, if somebody approaches you and says, hey, do you want to make this really dangerous journey and be abused along the way? And then once you get there, you actually have to stay in Mexico for an, unsure amount of time. That was, most people are like, yeah, I don't know about that. But once that was undone, we are now just, even people who go to the legal ports of entry are just let in and given a date, to show up 6 months later. Well, guess what? They're not showing up 6 months later. They're already in the country and, gone to the wind. So re-implementing that policy would help us just to get a basic handle on the flow of illegal immigrants.
Well, and I think it's going to be interesting to see if there is a shift to that in the coming, months. Because I agree. I think that seems like something everybody sort of is looking at one another like, well, why wouldn't you just take this one step, at least for now, from an executive order standpoint?
Yes.
Well, you brought this up several times, and I know that it is something that is a real concern, and that is the human impact, right?
Yes.
And we can look at numbers, and we can identify people as, asylum seekers, refugees. There's a lot of categories as we start looking at folks that want to get into the United States, legal and illegal immigrants. At the end of the day, we also are talking about human beings. And I know you have seen a tremendous amount of suffering, and there's these question marks about what can we do as citizens about that without perpetuating the problem.
Mhm.
And then this is such a vulnerable population, especially when it comes to them being victims of crime, or once they get to the United States being trafficked. So
Right.
talk to me a little bit about perhaps efforts that Texas has taken, or that you are seeing to try to just protect the folks that, whether it's legal or illegal, they're very vulnerable. And so what
Right.
does this look like?
Right. Well, we have recently increased the penalty for stash houses, that, houses where they're taken once they cross the border. So if you're caught doing that, we have significantly increased the penalties there. But honestly, I do not understand. We have to change the narrative around which side are the side that is trying to be merciful and humanitarian, because the left loves to take the moral high ground on this issue and act like, oh, well, we have to, you're being mean if you don't, put them up in hotels and provide housing and doing all this other stuff. But the only thing that is doing is increasing the number of people who are willing to sell themselves to the cartel to come here. And so it is not humanitarian to force people into slavery. And so the idea that anybody is are making these decisions by their own free will is ridiculous. And that open border policies are doing anything but enriching the cartels and making them more powerful and giving them more selling points. Hey, not only do we're going to get you across the border, but we're also going to give you free housing once you get there. I mean, like compared to the Remain in Mexico policy that you just talked about, someone's a lot more likely to sign up for that trip. So, and again, we have women who are, they start taking birth control before they make the journey because they know they're going to be raped along the way. We have young kids who are being abused and sold. I mean, the stash house thing is real, and they're being distributed. I mean, when you see the map, again, it's not just Texas. Once they get here, there's a very sophisticated network of they take them all around the country. But it's more difficult once you lose that the ability to control the entry point, and they're in the United States. Of course, you have a much harder time cracking down on it. So there is nothing about Biden's policies that are nice or humanitarian or kind or any of those things. The best thing to do is to take a strong stance to close the border, to say that the cartels are not going to be, that trafficking is not going to be possible, that there's lots of ways to legally enter the country, and to make sure that message permeates through the cartel network.
Well, and one of the conversations that we've had, because I've had an opportunity to travel around the country and speak to people in different states, is that the challenge with where we are now and the backlog of legitimate asylum cases, it's really sad, because there are people that come here because they are living in perpetual violence. There are people that really that these laws were initially passed for, but it's all just been abused and broken. So they're not even being serviced. And I think it's important with Texas in particular, and some women I had a conversation with in Florida, we talked about this at length too, because beyond the illegal crossings, the legal entry of migrants it's an economic driver in some respects, that we have migrant workers that are part of our economy. Obviously, that's the case in Texas, California, Arizona, Florida. And some of those workers, of course, are spreading out throughout the country. But talk to me about how you balance that out, because, I attended a debate recently. It was like, just close the border. And we're like, well, I'm not sure how realistic that is, maybe temporarily. But there is an important piece of our economy. Can you talk about that and how you balance those factors?
I mean, there is, Texas is a big agricultural state. And of course there is a part of the economy that is dependent on that labor. But I would say that there are plenty. This is not a new crisis, right? We didn't just like wake up yesterday and all of a sudden this is happening. This is something that's been going on for decades. And while it's everybody in Washington is always ripe to point fingers at the other side. I mean, the bottom line is that Republicans have failed too in enacting, and part of that, I mean, honestly, part of that is the voters issue. I mean, the last time that there was the gang of 8 that tried to do something about immigration, they were really really vilified, and it came up in their, they maybe lost their seats over it, and it was used against them. So at some point, we have to be willing to do something because right now there's nothing happening as far as federal immigration reform. But I would say that because this has already been going on for so many decades now, there are quite a few legal immigrants who maybe their parents came here illegally, but they were born here, and now they are legal U.S. citizens. So we have plenty of people who are filling that gap. And of course, I mean, Texans are pretty hardy people, so I would say that a lot of my constituency also are the people working, growing our crops and building buildings and all of those things every day, working alongside people who are illegal immigrants. But there's not, but then there's definitely been an increase in the segment of people who are they're modern indentured servants, right? They're being forced into this. And, if you just work this job for 3 years, actually it's going to be 7 years and we're going to take 50% of your money. Actually, now it's 100% of your money. So, I mean, we are perpetuating people finding themselves in this situation where they couldn't do anything else because they're forced into it by the people who have brought them over here.
There's so much criminality at every level. I want to bring Daniel back into the mix, if you don't mind. Hi, Daniel. Welcome back.
How's it going?
Something that Ellen, Representative Troxclair, sorry, Ellen, just brought up that I think is really important. And I know something that you've worked on quite a bit, Daniel, is that we talk about skilled labor. We talk about migration as an economic driver. Hearing what Ellen has to say about, what this looks like in Texas. And as I've heard concerns from, women, for instance, I was in Florida and there are some women there that are in the agricultural space, and they have had people working for them for 20 years who they have hired attorneys. They have tried to have them work through the process, and they have been unable to do so with resources. So we obviously have some real challenges here. Can you give us your take on this? Because I do think, we hear some of the pushback and why perhaps the legislation that was recently fairly close, why it failed was, there were too many legal crossings or there weren't enough considerations for that number, right? The magic number, whatever that's supposed to be that people we're going to let in. Can you address that a little bit for us? Because there's a skilled worker component to that, right?
Yeah, well, there's several issues here. On the agricultural side, the only visa that exists for agricultural workers to come to the U.S. is the H-2A visa, which, by the way, the Biden administration just issued a new regulation that's going to almost destroy, really, our guest worker program for agriculture, where they're going to let unions and union representatives go into farms, into property, and try to organize migrant workers against their will, charge union fees. It's a terrible takeover of the unions of our farms. This is happening right now, and people don't really know. And of course, the unions don't represent the migrants. They take pictures as if they're advocating, and there's not one single migrant worker who supports their cause because they don't care about the unions. They want to, harvest their crops, make money, and go home. That's what they want to do.
Gosh, yeah.
And the problem with many of our guest worker programs is, for example, in agriculture, it's only for seasonal needs. Therefore, year-round farms are not eligible for sponsoring anybody. So, say somebody who has a milk processing facility or any kind of crop that is year-round, they can't sponsor any migrant worker. And then the issue is that because of our 1996 immigration reform during the Clinton years, where Republicans and Clinton both collaborated on this, we created what's called a bar to adjustment, where even if you crossed illegally into the United States, there's no way to ever fix your legal status. Even if you married a U.S. citizen, even if you have, worked for, 20 years in a farm, that changed in 1996. So that's one of those things. Generally, I think that our ideal system would be one where people who have a high level of education, who have a job offer, would be able to come here legally, and we would have a large number of people like that. And right now, that's very limited. We are really falling behind on high skilled immigration. We're making it really difficult for people who are multimillionaire investors, who, are people, CEOs. I'll give you an example. Because of our caps on the number of people per country that affect Indians, if you're a Nobel Prize winner from India, you will not be able to immigrate to the United States today. It's literally impossible. So at the same time, we're letting in 2 million illegal immigrants through our southern border. We're forbidding Nobel Prize winners and multimillionaires. So we are doing the opposite of what we should be doing. And that concerns me because it's what you said. It's the driver of our growth, of our innovation. Almost, more than half of Fortune 500 companies were founded by immigrants. Elon Musk, the richest man in the world, is an immigrant who came here on an H-1B visa. Isn't that something incredible? It's the richest man in the world.
Yeah, we've definitely got our priorities flip-flopped. And Ellen, I want to bring this kind of next piece to you because you alluded to it. There's been some political prices paid by those that have been willing to step into the gap. They've tried to solve problems because none of this is going to be perfect. It's going to be painful for somebody, right?
Mm-hmm.
Some stakeholders here are going to feel a pinch one way or the other. As citizens, what should we be doing to drive real policy change? What can we be doing at the local level? We have a brief on the refugee crises that we've seen, and really that was sparked for us by Afghanistan and Ukraine. But you have a lot of those same agencies. They're trying to service some of these things in a way that perhaps we can be supportive of. But really, we need some political will, and I think that requires some people. And we've got a lot of community members that I'm sure would like some advice from you on how do we become more active participants in getting this changed.
Yeah. And I have to preface this by saying, like, even though I've taken all of my own advice and like tried to be in a position where I can do something about it, like the problem still exists. And so it's disheartening and sometimes where you're like, I'm a state representative, I should be, when my constituents ask me, why haven't you fixed this yet? It's like, oh my gosh, I wish I had a magic wand and could do it. But everybody on this call obviously is already doing more than most of the rest of the country, because you're taking an hour over your work day to engage and to listen and to learn. The Policy Circle is such a wonderful resource. I am always an advocate of getting more young women, in particular, more conservative young women, to get involved in policy and politics. We have a severe lack of kind of the next generation of free-thinking women getting involved, and we need your voices more than ever, not just on this issue, but also what's going on with, transgender issues and women's sports and all these other things. So as you know, Stacy, I wrote a book on the issue because I'm so passionate, called Step Up, How to Advocate Like a Woman. And it talks about why we need your voice and then how to do it. So a lot of practical tips there. It's on Amazon. And you can find it there. So like get involved in your local city council, go to your school board meetings, do what you can with what you have where you are. So, Manhattan Institute is another wonderful organization. And in Texas, we have the Texas Public Policy Foundation that is active and engaged on providing, well-researched policy issues. Obviously, you're going to go vote for the candidates that you think are gonna best implement these things. But one of the biggest things that I have learned now, going from just someone who thought, well, I don't know that, I'm not sure that I know the answers. I don't have a political science degree. I don't have money. I don't come from a famous political family, and kind of like raising my hand anyway and getting involved anyway. And that the journey that has taken me on has made me realize that there is no perfect time. There is no perfect strategy. Like if you're passionate and you are willing to get involved, there is a role for you to fill. And we really desperately need you, because we can't just keep recycling the same people and the same talking points over and over again. And we're really at a turning point when you see what's going on our college campuses and things like that. Like the spokespeople matter, and people like me who can speak from a perspective of a mom or a young woman or whatever it is. I don't know how long I can still say young woman, but
I think you're safe. You're safe.
3 kids, but like, we need you. We need your voices. So go check out the book, Step Up, if you're able. Follow me on social media. I would love to engage with you and get you involved, because we need people who are willing to just take an hour of their day to do something to save our country.
Well, we are so grateful for your service, Representative Troxclair, and you do amazing work, and you're such an encourager. And Daniel, really to close us out, tell us some resources, because what we really like to do at the Policy Circle is spark interest. And then we want to make sure people are taking action like Ellen has suggested, but we also want that really to be informed action. So our brief is a good starting point, obviously, but if people want to kind of follow some of this in real time, tell us how we keep up with you and perhaps another resource that you think will enable us to be more informed so we can hold our political leaders accountable.
Yeah, of course. So, to answer here Kelsey's question about the burden of illegal immigrants and taxpayers, illegal immigrants obviously do pay taxes, not just on their purchases, but, they do pay income and payroll taxes in almost all cases. But the question is really what's the net burden of immigrants on, right? Because they receive services. Certainly in New York City, they're a huge net burden because they're not paying $300 a night in taxes to cover their free hotel rooms. But it really depends on the state's policies. In California, illegal immigrants are a huge burden because they were made eligible all for Medicaid. Just now, by the way, all illegal immigrants are eligible for Medicaid in California. Who's paying it? The Californians. So illegal immigrants are much less of a burden in Texas than they are in blue states. And so that's part of it. Resource-wise, I refer you to my page here in the Manhattan Institute. I will also link here in the audience chat one of my reports. If you can see what I've written, it's mostly about how do we make the system simpler and better for high-skilled immigrants. I also have an op-ed on National Review that you should definitely check out recently about easy steps that the president can take to reduce illegal immigration. One of them is that we could cut off 20% of the flow by simply stopping people who are not from the Western Hemisphere from flying into Ecuador, which is where all the Chinese, Africans, Asians, Europeans are going to, because they don't have visa requirements. So they fly into Ecuador and then they come to Mexico. If we just stop the flights, that's a 20% no-cost reduction of illegal immigration.
Wow.
And so there's a lot of easy solutions like that.
We like easy solutions around here. We just got to find people that have the courage to put those forward and enact them, right? So I am so grateful to both of you because you've given us things to think about both at the federal, the national, and really you just start thinking about what's the impact of my city? What's the impact of my town? And what can I do about it? And so we are so grateful to both of you. And we'll be making sure that we send out a recap of this. We'll be linking all the resources that you mentioned. And I really encourage everyone to click on the Policy Circle's website, our link, and subscribe so that you don't miss future events like this, that you get our newsletter and you get access to newly published briefs. It's an easy step that if you could take would really be, it's great for us to communicate with you and keep up with you and make you part of our community. And then, of course, would love for you to support the Policy Circle. You want to join us as a member? We would love to have you. We are building a growing, thriving community of curious and solutions-oriented folks. And so if that's of interest to you, please click on the link. And the last thing is host a conversation about immigration. Download the brief, invite some folks, use our proven and effective discussion model. It's a roundtable model. And I think you will learn so much more about what this issue means to your community members, your coworkers, invite some elected officials. This is a topic that everyone is going to be discussing, and we want to make sure that you do it in a way that is informed, effective, and leads to real and lasting solutions. So we are so grateful to our excellent speakers for the work that both of them are doing. Thank you, Representative Ellen Troxclair. Thank you, Daniel DiMartino. Thank you to the Policy Circle team that put this together, and we look forward to seeing you at our next Move the Needle with the Policy Circle. Thank you.